Howdy, thanks for joining us. I'm Benny Bridger, Director of Demand Gen here at Cloud Academy, joined with my colleague Mark Guiditta, Director of Sales. You'll recall from the title that we're talking about baselining today, kind of the first of three pillars of the skills intelligence platform. And so before we get into it, we'll cover a few different areas. So we'll cover what to think about before you assess, how companies and customers of ours are currently doing this now, ways to assess, so the different methods, and then the outcomes that you can see after the fact. So effectively what the results are. We'll keep this fairly casual, so 10-15 minutes. I just want to make sure we give you an accurate depiction about what baselining means for us and how we approach it. And before I get into kind of the questions here, baselining, think of it as just a way to level the playing field and get an understanding for what your tech team has from a skills perspective, competencies, and this can be from anything from Azure to AWS, even to more kind of refined subjects like Kubernetes or Java, Python, whatever it may be. And so baselining is a great way to kind of get that snapshot. And there's a whole lot of outcomes that come as a result of getting that sort of ground level assessment of what's going on. But before we get further into this, let's back up and think about, and I'll kick this over to Mark here in a minute. What should you be thinking about before you assess your team or teams, right? What are the key parameters, kind of the goal setting methods that you should have, and what's the best way to kind of attack this thing?
Awesome. Thanks, Benny. Really exciting topic to discuss. A lot of our clients really have this challenge, like, how do we even know where to start? Who do we assess? And it's a $1 million question. So some of our clients are thinking about it in not only cloud roles, but data, software, and anything that's cloud adjacent. Think about business roles as well. So think about all of those different areas of your business that are touching cloud or may have the ability to touch the cloud in the future, or at least have to have some open dialogue about it. So our clients today are thinking about the roles that they have inside of their organization, and then really defining what those roles look like and mapping the skills and the levels that each individual needs to have for some of those roles. So those are some of the common things that I see in the industry as a best practice to think about before you start assessing your staff.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line here is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, it's about building the outline before you write the entire book, right? You need to at least define the roadmap versus just jumping into something like this, right?
Yeah, you're spot on. You have to diagnose before you can prescribe. So really, you want to be able to understand what roles need to be assessed. You want to know what kind of assessment is going to be best suited for those roles. And then it's really just about, driving those individuals to complete the assessment in a non-threatening way, and just letting them know that this is really going to help us, take our organization to the next level and make sure that you have the right skills for these future roles or current roles that we have within the organization.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so flipping to kind of the next phase here. So how companies are currently doing it now, how some of our existing customers were doing it when we first chatted with them. And, I can lead off here and say that I spoke with a customer a few weeks ago. You weren't on the call with me, Mark, but ultimately the way that they described it, and this is a valid way of doing things, but I think it's important to highlight, the bandwidth challenges that come with this method. So we had a manager, he had a team of about 40 or so, something like that. And ultimately the way that he would assess his team is he would give his teams it was really just a piece of paper, if anything, Google Doc, and they would fill it out based on, their own assessment of their abilities. So from an AWS perspective, I think they were an AWS shop, it's AWS security. Are you a beginner? Are you intermediate? Or are you an expert, right? And so they went through that process, a lot of different technologies, platforms, everything that was relevant to their business. And then once that was finished, all 40 team members, the manager actually would go and interview each individual team member. So 40 individual interviews. And if it sounds like a lot, like, believe me, it is, because at the end of sort of this description that he gave, he talked about this taking literally 4 to 5 weeks. And again, that's knowing that there's other projects in flight, that there's other initiatives going on. So, when it comes to how companies are doing it now, this kind of self-assessment interview model is one way to do it, but it certainly has its drawbacks. It's very time consuming. So, Mark, can you talk about some of our customers, the ones that you've interacted with, and, I guess where they started, what assessment looks like today, kind of in your average tech team?
It's a phenomenal question. I think that the message that you put across here, as far as using a spreadsheet or using, some sort of Google Doc, is actually quite common. And the self-rating mechanism of assessing your staff is actually quite common as well. The challenges that I see with that, and I hear in the industry, is that simply you can rate yourself very, very high and be at a lower competency, or, on the reverse side, you think you are being way too humble about what your skill set actually is, and you rate yourself very low. Beyond just that self-rating, most companies just don't really have a standardized way, or they're relying on a legacy LMS system that is just showing who took what training, but it's not really demonstrating what actual skills these individuals have in the organization and what to do with those individuals who have those skills. So I would say, as far as the way that companies are doing it now, it's kind of legacy, and there needs to be some modernization about the way that we're really taking a true baseline assessment of our organization and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember another customer conversation that I was a part of, and they talked about using spreadsheets, and they had a fairly comprehensive and complex way of setting up these spreadsheets. It was, call it entirely proprietary, right? They had done this, built this from scratch, and it was a method that worked for them. But I think at the end of the day, it was time consuming to maintain. And it did have its, sort of drawbacks, right? There were only so many ways for them to kind of analyze and assess their team. And, leading into that, next piece here is, ways to assess your team, like what options are out there. I know that, when you think about kind of this whole topic, of course, the idea of a quiz, or like a test, so to speak. I mean, that's an obvious one in terms of a way to assess your team. But, I think what we found is there's many ways to do this. And some methods are more effective than others in, getting a real good snapshot of skills and skill sets. And so from your perspective, Mark, what ways do you think are most effective, and what have you seen from sort of a mix and match approach where, using certain methods in addition to kind of traditional methods, right? Like a quiz or, a test, something like that. What would you say is the best practice there as far as how to actually do the assessment aspect of this?
I would even take it to the next level. What is the best way that learners like to learn? It's mostly hands-on. When you're watching a video, you're grasping the concepts, but you're not really getting your hands dirty, or getting your hands to actually hands-on keyboard experience is what I like to call it. I think that modern companies are thinking about how do I not only get them to learn, even with theory based, but how do I get them to apply this to their job so they can immediately go back and have an impact. Really taking me back to the first question you asked me, what to think about before you assess. So one of the best practices, and the best way that I've seen it done so far, is working with organizations to do what's called a discovery workshop. We want to get a really intimate knowledge of what are the roles, what are the processes, and what are the skills that are going to be needed to be effective in those roles. And then we map those skills to those actual levels. And then that really determines, okay, in this business role, this individual might not be needing those hands-on keyboard. So let's put together a theory-based or scenario-based sort of baseline for that group. And then on the opposite side, if we have a team of architects or folks that are, mapping out organizational and long-term goals for the company, they need to get more of hands-on. They need to get those sort of scenario-based learnings or challenge-based learning. So I think organizations that are building that sort of assessment are really, taking this to the next level.
Yeah, it makes sense. And when you talk about scenario-based learning, I know that there are certainly capabilities these days where, you can use actual, production-like environments that kind of mirror the real thing to really put folks to the test. So can you drill into that a little bit more? Because I think that that's such an important piece of this. I know for myself, just in general, you can obviously read about something, you can study something in a multitude of ways, but there's nothing quite like getting into a system or a platform, whatever it is that you're doing, and doing it yourself, going through the motions, seeing it for real, so to speak. And I just think it's so important from a hands-on perspective that, it's one of the best ways that I know I learn. But can you talk a little bit more about the scenario piece? Because again, I think that's so key to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not only just a simulation, it needs to be the real environment. people need to learn in what they're actually working on in their environment. So from a scenario-based learning standpoint, some of the great ways that our clients are actually going through these is you think of a break fix scenario or a real true scenario, migrating something to the cloud, making a data lake from data. These are all very hands-on things and they require hands-on keyboard experience. So modern learning is putting all of that together into a particular outcome that you're looking to achieve. And then the individual is tasked with that with different validation steps. And that ultimately feeds into the outcomes of where any assessment goes. And I like to think of it as like intellectual currency. So once an individual completes that sort of assessment, whether it's hands-on or through theory, we want to see how much intellectual currency we have across the organization. And that's the measuring stick basically for that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And so, pivoting to kind of the outcomes, right? What do you get as a result of doing something like this? From an outcomes perspective, I know that, certainly, the outcome of saying, well, now we have this 360-degree view. Now we understand where we may have skill gaps. We know where certain hires may be needed based on, again, strengths, weaknesses, things that our current team doesn't have. So there's the hiring route, there's the upskilling route, like both have their merits, of course, pros and cons, if you will. And so as far as the outcomes go and what you do with this information, once you've effectively baselined your team, what do you see some of our clients and just in general, what do you see as the kind of the next course of action? What do you do once you have all of this information at your disposal?
Yeah, you're going to have a lot at your fingertips at this standpoint. You're going to have a clear picture of, I like to think of it as a bench of who knows what across the organization. And once you have that bench, it could really influence a lot of areas inside of your business, ultimately having a mega impact on your organization's bottom line and ability to produce revenue. Especially, technology companies. I could speak to one in particular that I'm thinking of right now. They're using skill intelligence and skills from like a skills inventory standpoint. So really getting a grasp of what their capabilities are and leveraging that data to put individuals on specific use cases or customer support cases. So that it really can help in a variety of different ways from a skills-based routing standpoint. From an ongoing standpoint, you're getting an understanding of inside of this role. Let's just say it's a software engineer and we're level 1. You're able to identify what skills software engineers level 1 in your organization have, and you're able to create that career path progression. So if an individual wants to upskill and they want to go to level 2 or level 3 or even a team lead one day, organizations are leveraging this data to identify what skills would be needed and what competencies are needed to be able to advance in your career to take that next step. So as far as an outcome base goes, you can use it for a variety of ways: hiring, ongoing upskilling and development, and then really being able to manage your people in a really effective way.
Yeah, I love that the skills inventory aspect of things. I think that's a great way to kind of define it and to put a cap on, what you really see once you reach this outcome and what you can do with it. I think the support piece, the case routing, that example, I think it's truly unique. And, I think it's a really cool way to make a great use of the baseline tool. And, I think it's just a unique way to go about this. And so I appreciate, all the thoughts here. Of course, we're live in the living room. So of course, here's my dog. But needless to say, that'll cap off what we're going to discuss here from a baseline perspective. Like I said, it's a 3-part series. So what we'll get into next time is the develop aspect of skills intelligence. And what that really means is drilling into courses. So what makes a good course? What types of courses are out there? Whether it's videos, whether it's hands-on labs that we've talked about, there's a lot of options out there. And I think it's helpful to at least go through, what options you have at your disposal, and how you can best get your team to really where they need to be. And, especially if you're using the baseline aspect of things, the baseline approach, boy, is it nice to have that kind of direction. So thanks again, guys, for joining us, and stay tuned for the next webinar, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.